And we'll get underway. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Better Leader Inner Circle. This is about coming up to almost our 10th or 11th monthly session. And we have folks from Calgary, Alberta, Edmonton, Alberta, Arizona, and Kansas right now. And I know there'll be a few people that said they'll be joining us as we get along. And this is more of a conversation. There is a presentation that will jump through a couple hoops here, but I hope to have this as a great conversation. And so the first thing I'd like to ask everybody is if I were to say what was or why do we hate meetings? Why do we hate meetings? What's the worst part about meetings, folks? You can just, we don't have that big a group, so you don't have to chat. You can just start talking.
Well, sometimes they can be unfocused. Sometimes they're criticized for being a waste of time, which they can be, but they can also be very productive.
Nice. Thanks, Todd. Anybody else? What's the worst part about meetings?
I think, Steve, they sometimes take away from actually doing the work, and they're often what you could do in 20 minutes sometimes takes a couple hours, so they're not very efficient, and you just end up stopping listening and then multitasking because you don't find it a good use of time.
Excellent. Good point. Anybody else got something to add? Eric or Nicole?
I agree with that, in many cases, if a clear objective isn't stated prior to the meeting, then it can go a variety of directions that may or may not be productive.
Right. Excellent. All good points. Well, here's a couple from some of the work I've done with some different organizations. Mostly people say they're unstructured. There's no what are we doing and how are we doing it? And obviously not relevant. If it's unstructured, it's generally not relevant. Boring. We'll get into boring in a bit, but I can always remember as a young, ambitious guy, always wanting to get in on the other side of that door in that meeting to know, because I was nosy and curious and I wanted to find out what was going on. And then I got in on the other side of the door and then I said, holy crap, what have I done? I don't want to be in this. This is terrible. Get me out of here. How many times have we been in a meeting when there's been no decision made, right? So you just talk and blather on and walk out, and the kiss of death, especially in my business and the teaching and consulting and speaking business, when somebody says, let's circle back to this into the new year or after Easter or after a holiday, for sure nothing has come good out of that time you spent with that person. So, and no decisions, and there's always the one or two people that their mouth has never stopped moving and it overwhelms everybody, even if they don't have anything to say. And I know, for example, Andrew and I worked together on a group, and it's like if a decision was made in the last meeting and somebody wasn't there, they seem to think they always have to relitigate it at the next meeting, right? So, like if you weren't there, didn't participate in the decision making, you've kind of lost privilege to speak up. And then the last couple I find on the right hand side of that little slide is like uncomfortable speaking up. So is dissent or questions welcome in the meeting? And the last one is interesting, is there's no drama. And we'll spend some time talking about drama in meetings as we go through this. But to keep it interesting, you want to have some conflict. You want to have some drama to be able to inspire people to think and consider what's going on. So meetings are quite frankly critical to us as leaders. We have to get information out. We need to bring people together to level the playing field, to make good decisions, hopefully decisions, to guide the organization. But they're often painful and frustrating and often long and seemingly pointless. And more often than not in meetings that, at least in my experience, most meetings are because they're scheduled and because there's an agenda, not because there's a point or a result you want to get to. So if you have, especially I find staff meetings to be killers because they're usually scheduled Oh, how about this one? The Monday morning staff meeting when everybody's still hung over and tired from the weekend, and you have to all get in a room and make some decisions and get people to be engaged. And there's nothing's changed since Friday. And so it becomes a kind of a pointless exercise, and it's hard to get people motivated. So what, of the meeting paradox, is there anybody that has a thought about what that looks like for them and their situation? Yes, we have to have these meetings, but how does that reflect in your lives and your day-to-day work? Has anybody got a thought or a past work?
This is Todd. One challenge that we have is we might have twice each week on Tuesdays and Thursday mornings, we have a leadership meeting, maybe 35 participants. We've been meeting for 3 or 4 years, and we'll have content and we might present something. And then regardless of the facilitator, the question might be, hey, we just looked at this, we just talked through this. What are your thoughts? What are your reactions? Just a completely open-ended question, and it's crickets. And I'm wonder about that, because this team has been together for years and we've met for years, and I'm not quite sure of the hesitancy. Yet one of the things we discovered is that if we break them into table groups of 5 or 6 and pose a question or two, the room erupts with chatter. So I don't know how you get a big group to open up for some great ping pong discussion.
Well, 35 is a lot. Well, first off, sorry, I want to go back to Nicole because she had her hand up a moment ago. Go ahead, Nicole, please.
Actually, that kind of dovetails well, because I'm sort of in a similar boat. In order to have productivity, I've gone away from meetings and I've gone to one-on-ones, and I've gone to sort of what Todd was mentioning, like a very specific question so that I can get very specific answers. I was finding the more that there is at the table, I'm not getting more volume, I'm just getting more dead faces. And so in order to have efficiency, I mean, it means more, and I don't want to use the word meeting, but it's more gatherings, more Zoom calls, but it's increasing the results. So yeah, I'm kind of with Todd. Like, I'd like to not have to have so many one-on-ones, but a group setting isn't always effective.
Right. There's some great conversations from Diana there about, we work together quite a bit when her place isn't in flood situation. She had some frozen pipes this week. That's why I say she's transferred from a private school to an aquarium. Yeah, it's like, there is a need to share and bring people together and figure out what's happening and where people are. And so, yeah, there's different tools out there. Andrew, I see you patiently with your hand up.
Thanks, Steve. I've got my LRGC Niners going. It's a committee Steve and I sit on together. To your point, Nicole, I find sometimes I've done that too, where I get much better engagement and more out of it with the one-on-one. One thing that I've started to do somewhat recently, because I've taken on an additional team within the organization here, is I'm trying to let other people as well in those kind of staff meetings present their work, or so they're not always hearing from me. And I've been finding, a small sample size thus far, that seems to empower the person who is leading the work so they can speak to it directly. But I think it does generate some questions, because maybe there's less of a power imbalance, or maybe it's just a different voice. But I've been seeing some better engagement by having other people speak, and it just seems to encourage a more fluid conversation. Again, small sample size, I've just started doing it, but so far so good.
Excellent.
I like that. Thanks.
Yeah.
That's great, Andrew.
Sometimes I find too, is if you pose a question, to a pre-meeting question to get people thinking, like if the subject is, it's front of mind because I teaching a course with one of the local universities here on facilitation in a broader sense than just meetings, business meetings. But to open, in the context that case study that we worked through in this course is around improving HR hiring processes, making them more efficient, more realistic. And so, what if you were to pose the question around, if I gave you $500, how would you improve the process? Just to get people thinking. And you might even, if budget allows, you might even say, look, we might actually implement this if it's a good idea, if we agree. And your budget gets $500, or you get a gift card for a dinner or something, to get people a little bit more motivated. Now, there's a downside to that, right? Because if people start bringing you ideas and they never go anywhere and they never get implemented, then they'll stop bringing you ideas. So it's like there's a downside to getting people thinking, but if we could juice the meeting with a pre-question before the meeting starts, sometimes that can be effective too. Yes.
I was just going to say, to that point there too, I've experienced that, not the financial incentive, but when you get people, you get that momentum going, you get people excited, you start getting this influx of participation and ideas.
Yep.
And what I've noticed is that if you don't have a plan or strategy on how you're going to deal with it, you kind of get one shot at it. And then if you don't do anything, then people become disengaged again, and you have to start over. So
Yeah.
To your point, I like that. It's just making sure, you have okay, if I'm going to get it, I've got to show some action in a timely manner, or else I'm going to lose the momentum.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So we'll explore that in a couple of moments here, Andrew. But so Patrick Lencioni says that a meeting is dynamic. Emphasis on dynamic interaction, involve a group of people discussing topics that are relevant to their livelihood, not a passive gathering of people to receive information. And I have a sense, I'm sorry, I think it was Todd that mentioned, 35 people in a room. It's hard to create dynamic interactions in that room. So the breakout session maybe is a best possible solution to that. The other thing around bringing people together is that people need to understand what the point is, right? So sometimes, yes, there are meetings when we share information and it's less dynamic. So you might just be sharing that, I don't know, something is happening, and we just need you all to understand that. But the key to that is, you really, just so you understand that as a leader, I am going to make the final decision. Right? Or as a group, we will make an agreement, and then we will move forward with it together. So people's expectations are fully understand what their role is here. If you're here to receive this information, just tell me that, and I'm as cool as a cucumber, right? If I'm part of the decision-making process, then I also need to understand that, so that when we get to a decision, I know that we will move forward on it because we've agreed on this decision. And sometimes, quite frankly, I'm the boss and I'm going to have to make this decision. I want to hear what you have to say about it, but I will make the final decision about this. And people will tolerate that and live with that. They might not be happy with that, but if they're clear about the expectations and their involvement in the expectations, then they'd be good with that. Now, I heard somebody say something there. Sorry. So I think one of the things we need to make pretty clear about what is going on is that we get away from these boring and ineffective meetings and start with attitudes and approaches of the people who lead them and that's sort of what I just said, right? It's like create a level understanding of what reality will be and what the expectations of the meeting will, and how people's participation will be involved. So, for example, if you were to pass on just sheer information around something and everybody was cool with that, then there's no need to book an hour's meeting. There's been some research done on this. Does anybody know why we have hour-long meetings? Because it's a default in Microsoft. Because when you go in to book a meeting, it defaults to a certain setting, and then you think, oh, we got an hour meeting. Why not have a 45-minute meeting? And if you're inviting people to Todd's point, if you're inviting people to this meeting, what about if it's information sharing or some other kind of a level of meeting that's not as dynamic as some? What if you were to say, look, these 35 people are invited, but if you have something better to do and don't have to be here, you're excused. Yeah, Nicole, please.
That's pretty subjective to the definition of having something to contribute.
Yeah.
I think that you would start to see disinterest because somebody's saying, "Oh, I don't have anything to contribute," when in fact you think they do.
Well, then
So
you
I
need,
would,
you need to be clear about it. I'm not saying,
yeah. And
Yeah.
I think that that kind of goes back to what you were saying about, like, you had mentioned like a prep kind of question.
Yeah.
And so we've started to do that so that in advance of the meeting, I'm like, I need you to bring 3 things to the table,
Right.
so that we are actually intentional with this conversation.
Yeah.
And this might sound silly, but we're also using different language. Like, we're not calling it a meeting if it is just one person talking, then that is considered like an update. Or and then, as I said, we've gone to more of the one-on-ones.
Yeah.
But the only time I use meeting now is if I am actually meeting a person, whether it be online or not, and there's going to be an exchange of information. But otherwise, I'm doing one-on-ones, I'm doing updates. I'm trying my darndest to get people re-engaged.
Yeah. Well, maybe to add to the point what I was saying, and you're right, Nicole. So, like, but clarity comes in the agenda, right? Like, why are we meeting? What subject are we going to talk about? And this is the outcome. And I'm not offended by the fact, how many times have we been invited to a meeting? We're wondering, why in the hell am I in this room? Like, it happens all the time, right? So maybe it's, yeah, go ahead, Andrew. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I was just gonna say too with this conversation, it's good. I like that kind of grounding question on the front end, Steve, that you mentioned, and then the way the whoever's chairing it, if they have some way to be mindful of being inclusive and find ways to include people or make it relevant, I think is good. The other grounding thing, I think that we've started to do it with some of our board work, as you know, Steve, is if we are talking about a specific item, connecting it to our strategy or connecting it to something foundational so people can maybe see the purpose of the meeting contributing to something bigger, which gives it a bit more purpose. And then as you're developing it, if it's like, I can't really connect this to anything, it kind of maybe gives you a flag that maybe we don't need the meeting or maybe we shouldn't be doing this. So I do like that, whether it's a question or grounding to a strategy or a bigger piece of work, connecting it to other things in the organization, I think helps people maybe get some value out of it and determine if it's relevant.
We'll get in a little bit. We'll get into there's 4 types of meetings that I think we should consider. You can call them what you like when we get there, but they're relevant to what we've been talking about here. Like, when does it become something else? So, like, I quite frankly, all you have to do is miss an important decision. And if you were somebody said you could be excused from this meeting, you don't have to attend, and you miss something important, I'm going to tell you what, you're going to pay a lot more attention the next time, right? So it's training a culture and developing the values about why you're gathering and what the decision making is. And so, for example, if you had I'm not particular, I know it happens and I know why it happens, but if you have 3 major subjects in a meeting, one of them might be HR hiring. Well, the people that are involved in hiring are going to, in touching that subject matter, are going to be there for that part of the meeting. And maybe they don't need to be there about another part of the session. But I think there's an element of allowing people, recognizing that people are adults, and if they're not making the right decision, then that becomes a performance issue, right? So it's an education, and then it's a learning piece. So what is the drama? So this goes to why you should be there, right? Like, why are we meeting and why is this important? To the point of a bunch of people in a room, I always look around the room and I do some internal math about how much this is costing. Like, the hourly rate of some meetings is astounding. I can't imagine in a healthcare system, a bunch of 35 people in a room for an hour is probably costing $35,000. Well, that's probably high, but costing certainly $5,000-$10,000 in labor, just a burden alone. So why are we getting there? Why do we need to be there to care? So in the HR environment, the HR example we were talking about earlier, the hiring example, like the compelling case needs to be made to people that, hiring takes too long. We're losing people before we onboard them. People are disappearing. We're understaffed. We're straining the whole organization, and we need to fix this. And I need your help. So that's a more of a compelling case than, hey, we're going to meet and we're going to discuss how to hire people. Everybody's eyes already rolled in the back of their head because they're frustrated with the system as it stands, and they're not going to be involved. And again, part of the hook is, why are you coming together? Like, I need your input to solve this problem. I need your buy-in and agreement before we move forward, so people understand what's there. And then we need to get to conflict. And when we're talking about conflict, you're not talking about duking it out over the boardroom table, but we want to be able to have somebody who's a contrarian. And I know Andrew and I, we work with one person in particular that's extraordinary contrarian and creates a lot of drama around him. But at its core, in the background, there's actually a kernel of a good idea in the question that he's asking, and it's just, how does it get asked? And just by having that person in the room creates drama that forces people to explain themselves better and think about things better. I find it frustrating as hell because I'm not, but I just find that challenging. But really, if you step back a little bit and understand what's happening here, then we can create some drama about it. And if you have a conversation with people, you need to be able to allow them to speak. So as a leader, we should not, for the most part, unless it's a very directive thing that you're doing in the meeting, we need to start by asking, facilitating and managing the speaker list appropriately. So you should always start with the least powerful person in the room to go first. There's if you've ever seen a movie like A Few Good Men or a military movie where there's a court martial, the one thing that they don't really tell very well is the lowest ranking person in the panel, in the jury of officers, speaks first. Because if the most senior person spoke first and gave their opinion, what's the rest of the people going to do? They're just going to clam up and shut down. So you need to be able to draw those people out. Or if you've got somebody who's dominating the conversation, you have to be a bit respectful and say, okay, Bob, that's a really good point. And I'd just like you to sit on that for a minute because I want to hear from Mary. Just be not aggressive, that's not the right term, but an active facilitator of what's going on in your meeting. So if there's somebody way down the food chain in the meeting and there's a bunch of senior people, if the senior people start talking first, what's that junior person going to do? They're just going to sit on their hands, keep their mouth shut. Or worse, say they were in a room when something happened where someone said an opinion and they got a blast of shit. Are they ever going to raise their voice again? They go, no, I saw what happened to that. I saw what happened last time. I'm not ever going to talk like that again. So we need to be managing the speaker list. That's probably not the right term, but speaker list, you know what I mean? Participants. And go around the room and ask people specifically, Mary, what do you think about this? How is this going to impact you? Because they might just say, oh, like in most relationships and marriages and partnerships in life, the kiss of death to any conversation is, I'm fine. Because they're not fine. So, you really want to be able to draw this out and make sure people be an active part of the conversation up until the decision is made. So if we can get conflict on the table, and sometimes you might even have to go before the meeting and go to some people that that are opinionated, or they're very vocal, or you might need them to say, look, Charlie, I just need you to sit on your hands today in this meeting. I know you have a strong opinion about this, but I just need you to be quiet because I need everyone else to participate in what's going on. So you need to be an active manager, manage this meeting and facilitate this meeting a lot more than what you would expect to do until you get people comfortable with the process. And you need to defend I'll say defend the people who are more junior in the organization so that their voices are heard and heard respectfully. Because you might be making a decision about something that some poor warehouse person or data entry person or receptionist or whatever it might be has to implement, and they're going, "This is dumb. Like we can't do it. What you're asking us to do." So, and then this is real-time permission around allowing people to speak up. And it's painful, right? You need to be able to allow people to get it off their chest. And simple questions, open-ended questions, like, if somebody says something that I'm not even sure if it's true, I just like it, so I'm going to say it. I heard recently, you have to ask somebody why 3 times. The Buddha, there's sort of a Buddhist quote where you have to ask somebody why 3 times before you fully understand where they're coming from. So if somebody says something in the room and they made a statement, maybe you should take a moment and say, could you restate that for me? Could you say that again in different words so I can understand what you're coming from? And why is it why is this important to you? You might even have to take a break and allow that person to speak privately or confidentially to get that out there, because it might be important. So, these things create the conflict and the drama that you want to have in the meeting to be able to move an idea from just a thought to something practical and realistic. So we've spent quite a bit of time already talking about conflict, but it's respectful and it's learning. And if people are rolling their eyes or staring at their phones or not participating fully, then that's not respectful. And you as a leader need to set the example. So the hardest thing for us to do is to check our phone and set it on a side table. And maybe that's the rule in the meeting, unless there's some urgency. But maybe that's the rule in the meeting: is phones sit on the sideboard. And you need to be able to participate fully in this conversation. And by not having, if anybody's listened to me and heard me over the last while, is by short-term discomfort in conversations and discussion points creates the environment for long-term success. So, I think I try to be as observant as I possibly can, and I can always tell when somebody's behaving in a way that they're checking out or they're not happy. So if we all know the body language, rolled eyes or turning away from the chair of the meeting, or Andrew's probably seen me do this a dozen times, leaning back in my chair and staring at the ceiling, counting the holes in the acoustic tiles. Oh, we got a late arrivee. That means I'm checking out. So if hopefully not everybody is as blatantly obvious about it as me. Hello, Joe. Welcome. Hopefully not everybody is as blatantly obvious about it as I am. But when you see that, then you need to stop and say, okay, Steve, what's going on? Like, you have something to say. And recently in a meeting, in fact, Andrew I think you might have been in the room for this one. We did a lot of work on a project to make a recommendation for a decision, and then the debate started all over again, and the decision was from a committee was being relitigated, and I was so frustrated. I did exactly that. I just pushed my chair back a wee bit and stared up at the ceiling, and somebody took the time and says, what's going on? And I was able to get it off my chest. Now, I still wasn't super happy about how it was going, but at least someone asked me for my opinion and got it off there and created a little bit of drama, I suppose, but we were able to move forward. So how do you know what's going on your team? And this is probably, I'm going to try to blow this top piece up here a wee bit. So this is a tool that I have available to some. It's called the team assessment. And almost every time there's a problem in a meeting, it's because of lack of trust. You can see that bottom line of this is an actual team that I did this work for. There's a lack of trust. Conflict is low. Now, this group had a high commitment or higher commitment, but then they had no accountability. And it goes to what we talked about earlier in the session, where if I don't think anything is going to happen here, then the accountability is a problem, right? Maybe me as a leader have let down the team one time too many. They've asked for something, we agreed to something, it didn't happen. That I have to wear that as the boss. And then the accountability. So again, why are they not responding? Well, they don't trust that I'm going to live up to what I'm saying, or the organization is not going to live up to what they agreed to. And the conflict falls down because because they don't trust, they're not willing to have that argument, or when I say argument in the best sense of the word, and debate with me as a leader that I'm not living up to the values and expectations of the team. Or somebody else on the group is doing that. So we need to understand more and more about what's going on. But I think it's important for us to understand that lack of trust and lack of conflict ripples through the whole organization, that people don't understand, don't believe what's going to happen next, and don't understand. So we've all been there many times. I know I have been, I'm sure you have been, and maybe this is an example of what some of you are facing at work, is the meeting stew, right? Everything's in there from soup to nuts. And, you know, there are times and places where you may have to go over a lot of ground. I did a project for a pipeline company here a while ago around communications and why the people on the front lines were not hearing what was saying. And they would have all-day staff meetings, and most people were either phoning in or doing it virtual. This was before the pandemic, so a lot of people were online, and they would start at the top of the list. And by the time they got to HR issues and things that were important to the employee, it was like 3 p.m. And most people had long since checked out. I'm sure if I was a tool operator out in the field in my truck, I would have had the phone on the speaker, and I would have been out doing something completely different, and trying to listen in on what was going on. So people weren't getting the information because it was completely buried in a whole bunch of other stuff that nobody really cared about, except maybe a few people. So how do we do this? So here's just a model that you might want to consider in your organization. So the first is like a daily check-in. You might even consider it kind of a staff meeting. It's a small, intimate staffing. I know in construction and oil and gas and lots of operations, you might have a tailgate meeting or a toolbox meeting where you just go over the day, what's going on, what's happening today, what happened yesterday, what do we need? And it should only be 5-10 minutes. But I think we could do that in an administrative or an office environment or a service industry where you can just have that quick check-in. And then you might want to consider going to a more weekly tactical meeting. And that maybe, to Diana's point earlier, this may be that thing where you start talking about, okay, how are we going to get our work done this week? Who's doing what? What impacts our organization? That's maybe, for example, I'll use Diana as an example. She operates a school. So there might be a maintenance or facility issue that impacts the education side of it, or vice versa. And you want to have that conversation around how this is going to impact us. If there's a bigger problem coming up in these daily and weekly tactical meetings, then I would strongly suggest you take that item and move it to a monthly meeting, and that might be the only subject that you talk about in that meeting. Now, I'm not saying if it's urgent, or an emergency, we're not talking about that. But if there's things that are not being resolved, or things that keep coming up in the weekly meeting or the daily meeting, then take that one item and move it into a special meeting. Maybe it's a 2-item meeting. I don't know. If you got more than one thing, but this meeting there is to be able to solve that problem. And that's the hook, right? And that avoids your meeting stew. So you're not talking about the vacuum cleaners and whatever you're in this meeting. You're talking about the one urgency. It could be we lost a client, a significant client, so it's going to impact our revenue. So we have to have a meeting and we have to solve this one problem. And that will create the dynamic that people will find, oh, this is important. This is interesting. I got to be involved with this. And if you seed the meeting in advance, people come prepared. Maybe, Nicole, like your idea, like what are the 3 ideas you have? If it's a customer, maybe you have you're noticing an ongoing customer service issue that's going on in your organization, or a patient issue, maybe, Todd, or something else. Maybe you could say, what a powerful question is, look, we're meeting tomorrow. We have this, we're getting a lot of patient complaints or customer client complaints about our service. What is the one thing we could do that could dial up our ratings from 10 to 11? Like, to quote the old Spinal Tap movie, right? Just crank it to 11, because sometimes 10 isn't enough. But how do you do that? And that will inspire people to start thinking about that and bring that to the meeting in a way. So you might try to cut that back. If it's an urgency, I don't know what, just frozen pipes. We'll pick on Diana again. Frozen pipes is the issue. Well, then you might say, okay, we got to deal with the frozen pipe issue. We're going to have a special meeting tomorrow at 10 o'clock, and we're only going to talk about one thing. How do we deal with this issue? And people will bring a bunch of other stuff, try to bring in other stuff, lay it on top of that meeting, but you need to be aggressively in charge of how you manage the agenda. So if it's one thing, or if it's 2 things, or maybe 3, I'd probably try to stay away from 3, because by the time you dealt with a 3rd thing, everybody's tired and whipped. So maybe it's like 1 hour, this subject, then we're going to take a half an hour break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to deal with the next item. But it's not 20 things. It's just 2 things or 1 thing, as the case may be. And then I like the offsite. I know it's not always feasible for all sorts of reasons, financial and other, but then you pull this quarterly meeting where you gather up these important things that impact your strategy and the long-term health of the organization. And you take people and put them in a room, ideally offsite if it's possible, but you put them in a room and you deal with it then. So this is setting going forward, right? So daily is what's happening yesterday and today. Weekly is what's going on and how do we solve that problem. Monthly strategic are dealing with the big items. And then the quarterly is like looking forward out over the year. And the quarterly offsite, I would say one of the questions that should determine the agenda items for that are, say, what are the things that if we do not achieve this item and be successful in this item in the next year, we will have failed. And I wouldn't be afraid of using that kind of language. So what do you think about the different, now you can use different language. I don't feel tied to the types of meeting names, but what do you feel about trying to segregate your meetings into a little bit of more thoughtful process in dealing with items? Is there any thoughts? I know it's hard. I get it, and it's time. I fully appreciate that. Just jump in. There's no need to. Cool. I always like having Nicole in the room. She always got something to say.
How are you finding this, Steve, in a world of remote work? How are you doing daily check-ins from a remote team? Weekly tactical, I'm good with, and I love the concept of a 1-item monthly strategic. But how are you advising that we have this sense of intention when it's remote and it's every day?
So we're only talking a few minutes. So maybe
Okay.
at the beginning of the day, it's like, okay, everybody, I just need everyone to jump on the phone at 9 o'clock.
Okay.
And we're going to talk about what happened yesterday and what we're working on today. And if there's nothing to say, we'll be off at 9:01. But I promise you, it will not last longer than 5. Maybe a promise is a too strong a word, but my commitment is this will not last longer than 5. I don't know how many people your team is what? How many?
Tiny. We're like 4.
4. So, in theory, you should be off the phone in 10 minutes.
Yeah. Okay.
And if you don't have anything to say, what the problem with this particular type of meeting is, it becomes, oh, everything's wonderful. And it just becomes a self-validation. You need to train people to say, what's going on. So for example, I know this is probably too high level. So you may have seen, I wrote an article about Alan Milani, who used to be the CEO of Ford Motor Corp.
Mhm.
And he would call a meeting of his senior executive. And these people were presidents and executive vice presidents of whole auto divisions and worldwide divisions. And nobody would say anything in the meeting. And they were losing 17 billion with a B billion dollars a year. And obviously there was something wrong, right? So how do you get people to tell you what's important and not say, oh, everything's wonderful? So, you have to build that muscle reflex that people say, well, yesterday, I'm just going to read into, I know your work a little bit, Nicole. So yesterday we lost a donor because, right? Oh, okay. But today I'm going to be speaking with Mrs. Bloggins, who is considering a donation to the organization. And then you can say, oh, great. What do you need help with?
Yeah. And that's kind of, I sort of do that on my weekly tacticals.
Yeah.
It's like what are the 3 things you've got on your plate this week and who do you need help from kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I don't want the daily check-in to be like water cooler because we don't have time.
Yeah,
you
you
know?
may not find it valuable. That's okay. This
Yeah,
is just a
okay.
suggestion. I'm not saying you need to do this. I'm just saying you might be doing this with your one-on-ones, right?
Yeah.
But at some point, you have to bring it together to flatten the information or share the information and flatten it across the organization.
Yeah.
Because
I
sometimes,
also do quite a bit. I use like the chat feature, and I just always log in first thing and I say good morning to everybody, and I say like I'm on a couple of meetings, but if you need me, chat or text. Like I just sort of make that.
Yeah.
We all made it into wherever we are today. We're all, so I kind of do like a check in that way, not so much about work, but just like, did you get here?
exactly, yeah. Well, like I said, Diana made some comments there too. Like, sometimes you have to be a little bit more proactive too. Like, fine, everything is okay is maybe not the right answer, like not a satisfactory answer. You might want to ask some open-ended questions to get people to to get people to share. Now, again, I go back to the conversation we had earlier. What you don't want to do is have people share stuff and not do anything about it, because they'll stop. They'll just stop talking to you eventually. So if they start raising issues, you need to be able to close the loop. So I don't know, maybe it's something simple. Well, my monitor is acting up. I just saw Diana said something about the computer. So my monitor or my keyboard or my computer keeps freezing. Well, what's going on? And if it means buying a new monitor, it's $200. $150 for a new monitor these days. You're a hero for solving that problem. And then they start bringing you bigger problems. So you have to start out small and get quick wins in this conversation. So people do bring stuff to you.
So Steve, hi, this is Joe. And again, apologies for the late entrance. I've been a huge fan of your articles, and it's impossible to squeeze out some time to come and join one of these, but I somehow managed to make it to the second half.
Nice.
Let me challenge you a little there.
Please do.
So one, so to the answer of the virtual teams, we've used tools like specifically Monday in our case, but I know Google Chats, etc. We use WhatsApp a lot because we have an international team. And so we have a chat for the management teams and separate teams so that they can chat and move things forward quickly.
Mhm.
I don't like the daily check-ins, except for my production staff,
Yeah.
because they're there in person, and I want them to make sure that they're all there in person. With regards to problems, I have this article that I remember from HBR that was like, "Don't let the monkey get on your back."
Yeah.
And principal, I don't want problems. I want them to solve stuff
Interesting.
as much as possible, because then I'm the bottleneck.
Yeah.
And then they wait for a meeting to solve problems, which is definitely not what I want to happen. I want them just to filter out the most critical, pressing problems that we need to solve as a group, because there's divisions or discussions or disagreements or whatever the case may be. So in my view, it's if you can solve a problem offline as quickly as possible, solve it, and don't raise the problem, but bring it in with a solution, and bring it in with a couple of options, so that we're, by the time you bring in a problem to the group, you said, hey, these are the couple of options, this is the one I recommend, and that way the group just makes a quick decision versus you sort of being seen as the problem solver. Would you know?
So there's a balance, I think. You know, there's an old army saying, there's a boss of mine used to use it, why bark if you got a good dog? Let people do their job and solve things for you if that's their role and stuff, and reward that. And people are going to make mistakes, and that's okay. But the one caveat or one thought I have to what you mentioned, I may have misunderstood, so please do push back and correct, is that often we say, if you got a problem, bring it to me, but make sure you bring a solution. And so one of the things that creates is, I believe, is that if they had a solution, they would solve the problem. If they don't have a solution, they need to come to you. So I would be a little more cautious around saying, bring solutions with you when you come. Maybe it's bring your thoughts with you when you come, because if they need you, they don't have the solution. So, and it might be a roadblock for people bringing things up if you were to have, if you, even unintended, I've said it. Hey, I got an open door policy, but if you come in with a problem, make sure you bring a solution. Well, then they go, well, Steve expects me to have a solution.
Point taken.
Yeah. But if you have Eric, I'll be with you. We'll call you. I'll just finish this one thought. But if you, ideally, you create an environment where people, your job is if you can solve it, let's solve it. Push the decision making to where the information is, and if you can figure this out, let's do that, and then let us know so we can figure out what happens the next time. I'm completely in favor of that. And like I say, maybe daily check-ins isn't always appropriate, especially in an administrative or in a sort of a virtual environment, but I can see in a production site where, of course, daily things are pretty important. Eric, you're patiently with your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned Alan Mulally earlier, and he's a wonderful example of what we're talking about here. And in the context of Ford, you mentioned when he took over Ford, they were losing $17 billion a year. And in his very first meeting, he asked everyone how everything's going, and everything was great. And so he's like, are you kidding? You plan to lose $17 billion? But they had a culture of fear, this culture that you just alluded to there, where if you didn't have a solution, you didn't bring up a problem.
Great, because someone's trying to fire you and yell at you, right?
You get fired. You'd get it was a complete fixed mindset, like afraid of failure, because if I fail, I'm going to get fired. And so Alan changed the entire culture of bring your problems here. Let's be innovative together. Let's use our collective brain power. Like, you don't have to solve this problem on your own. You change that whole culture, where within a couple months, everybody was bringing their problems to these meetings. And of course, the rest is history, that Ford came out of that as the only U.S. automaker not to take a government bailout because they were profitable.
Yeah. No, and I think if I remember the story, Eric, you can correct me if I'm wrong too, is I think he actually, one of the next meetings, he seated somebody to bring up a problem in the room, because they had a a stoplight, red, green, yellow light version of problems, and everybody was green, and he got one person to put red or yellow up, and the room went completely dead silent, right? Like it was like,
Yeah, my understanding is he did not seed that person, but that person actually had the courage
yeah, that could be right. Yeah,
to raise his hand, and he was the head of an entire division, like you mentioned. There was a tailgate issue that was holding things up, and he had the courage to bring it up. And Alan says that the room went silent, that people thought a trap door was going to open up and this guy was going to be taken out, right?
yeah.
But Alan stood up and applauded. Thank you for bringing up this problem. Let's solve it together.
Yeah.
And the rest is history.
Yeah, exactly. How much courage on both sides, right?
Yeah, huge.
Yeah. And that, all he had to do was roll his eyes or say something untoward or make light of it, and no one would ever then put their. I think too, and Eric, obviously remembering the story better than I, but within a few weeks, like 3/4 of the lights were yellow because
yellow and green and red.
Joe, you have something? Oh, sorry. He came in.
Yeah, I was going to say I couldn't agree more. I've done some program management office work and large scale transformation work, and no matter how much you encourage people to show yellows or even reds, there's a lot of pain and suffering. There's a lot of fear in doing that, and so the question becomes, you can say it, but they won't buy it. So any tips on really other than standing up in that one occasion and clapping, which still, the one event may not make the rule. Is there any other ideas that you have into creating that?
So, one of the things I've learned more so since I've been consulting, and I think it applies to what your question is, Joe, is I spend a lot of time when I do an engagement with somebody, I spend a lot of time talking to the individuals. One-on-one, and often electronic surveys and the like, but the one-on-one conversations. And then as I develop the report to leadership, and report back to I always try to make sure that leadership is okay with reporting back to the participants in the conversations. And they see their word, and I try to use their words as best I can. So they see themselves reflected in that conversation. So instead of putting people on the spot in a meeting or in a group setting, maybe the conversation needs to be, Joe, one-on-one with you and the people that are participating. And then you present the information so that they see their words reflected back to them. And then you can start having that conversation. And if people are honest with you, they'll tell you that, this isn't working or that's not working. And then what you do is you start slowly moving people to this place where they are more open and trusting to be able to say, green light, yellow light, not green light, sorry, yellow light, or heaven forbid, a red light. And if they don't get slaughtered in public and fired the next day, then, and the whole organization steps up to help solve that problem, then people will start to bring more and more of that stuff forward. Does that help?
Very much so. I agree. I can see the point there. And the taking it on one-on-ones is important. At some point, though, it will come up to the light of everyone.
Sure.
And I think it's how you react at that moment, especially senior management. That is going to make a very important mark on whether the behavior continues or not.
So how powerful would it be if I came to you, Joe, and said, "Oh, I got a red light on the production line because we're not going to be able to hit our targets this month." And then we have this conversation, hopefully, let's say we were at the place, built enough confidence and trust in the organization that we could have this conversation in a meeting. And Joe, you turn to the whole team at the table and say, "Oh, Steve's got a problem. How do we solve it?"
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a very good nuance, sorry.
Yeah.
Because you're right in inviting the team to solve the problem, not speaking first if you're the leader.
Yeah.
That's a very nuanced and strong suggestion.
Because I think the back to the conversation about Alan Mullally and Eric again, but the first person that put a yellow light up had a problem, and somebody else across the room and said, "Oh shit, we had that same problem with the Ford Mustang, and this is how we solved it." And then within a week, that light, the first guy's light turned green because they solved the problem as a group, as a team. So I think there's something to that, and I really like this. To change a culture, you just can't launch this new culture, right? You need to be able to facilitate. Take care, Andrew. Facilitate this so you build the confidence up and build people's trust in the situation. And then how do you get to okay, Todd, take care.
Steve, can I add one more thought?
Sure. Eric, yeah.
What another thing that made Alan so successful is he lived it.
Yeah.
Like his character, his transparency, his integrity was the example. And he didn't have a problem in front of his team saying, "Hey, this is where I need help." And so, Joe, like for you to be the demonstration of it would be really powerful. For you to be the one saying, "Hey, I screwed up here and I need some help. What do you guys think?"
Yeah. And the other thing, we're getting a little bit of Alan Mullally fan club thing happening here, but the other thing he did too, I recall the story, was there was somebody that was not a very nice human being and not demonstrating the values that Mullally expected of his senior leadership. And after a meeting, when this guy acted not out of character, probably completely within character, but acted in a way that wasn't appropriate, Alan Mullally walked him to his office, and on the way they were just chatting, and he says, "I understand where you're coming from," and he says, and the guy said, "Yeah, this is just the way I am. This is how I respond." He said, "Well, that's okay. You're welcome to do that. You're just not going to do it here anymore. We need to find a place where your attitude and the way you work can be successful." And if anybody's worked with me, I've hijacked that quote a little bit about people that are problematic on different teams. And I say, we need to figure out how we can allow this person to be successful somewhere else. But yeah, the other thing I just like to touch on quickly is, and I'm going to do one more slide, and then we'll switch to the screen because I think I'm wrapping up towards the end. There's different psychometric tools, and I think that if you and especially the leadership team or your management team or the team you work with closely, I would recommend that you invest a little bit in something like DISC or Myers-Briggs. They're all problematic in their own way. Like these are not panacea solutions. Like DISC, I can help you find. There's some free online ones that give you at least a ballpark idea. Then we can also do the full meal deal DISC, or Myers-Briggs, or whatever turns your crank as an organization, as a person. But if you kind of understand a little bit about where somebody's coming from, then it helps you to be able to manage these meetings. So if somebody is high on like not just influence, but like I remember doing, I think it was Myers-Briggs when I was last job I had, and we had a woman who was a general manager, brilliant, lovely, super smart, but she was a geophysicist, and it was a social services organization, but she was so far off the chart on data and facts and figures, and then there was this whole group of people that were all on the soft side, on the emotional side, and there was this clash of personalities, I would say, right? And so by understanding that where she was and what she needed to make decisions, it allowed all these other people to reframe how they dealt with our boss. So instead of just bringing a big, long, soft, sad story, they learned that they had to bring facts and figures and data. Now, Leslie was not a completely cold-hearted soul. She had compelling, could take a compelling story, but she needed facts and needed figures. So if you understand where somebody's coming from as far as their the way they think and the way they respond, that also helps you be able to manage. So if there's one person on your team who is all facts and figures and data, then you need to understand how to communicate to that person a little bit differently. I'm going to quickly change over my camera and do a screen share because I want to talk about, just before we're wrapping up here a little bit, I want to talk about agreement. So how do you get to agreement? If you've decided that, people, no, wait a minute, sorry, I can't talk and think at the same time. Screen share, there we go. If you've decided that you are going to make the final decision, the people need to understand that. We talked about that earlier. If you've decided that it is some form of agreement, you can say, look, this is not a super serious, significant thing, but what we need to do is come to terms with it, and it'll be is everyone okay with a majority vote or a 75% vote? And people can raise their hands and make their comment. And then people need to understand at the end of this discussion that once we've agreed, everybody has to buy in. I find consensus a terrible leadership word personally, but what consensus means is we've had a discussion, we've had a conversation, and we need to be able to so the other way you could do it is if you've got a room full of people and you've got, say you put a board up, a chart on the board, and you're making a decision about something, and you might say, okay, what I need everyone to do right now is to take a piece of Post-it note and write where you are as far as agreement with the decision. Like 5 is, I'm fully behind it, I'm completely bought into this, and 1 is you're not at all. So on your board, you might get a bunch of people to put their Post-it notes all up on a board. So you got some are 4.5, you got some are around 3, you got maybe 2 or 3 people here that put their Post-it notes here that are completely bought in. And then the conversation is a little bit different. People can see. So why do people not agree? Well, mostly because they don't have all the information. Or potentially there's some value clash here. And then you say, okay, so Mary, you voted a 2 on this. What is it you need to move you to a 3? Maybe going to 5 is too much of a leap for Mary, but maybe we can get her to a 3. And then so now you got 3 people at 3. How can you get them to 4? Or maybe the conversation then becomes, how do we get you guys over here? Can you live with 4? What can you give up that you can get to 4 that we are all together? At least we agree on this one thing. Excuse me. So, there's different models of this, but the worst thing you can do is, does everyone agree? And everyone, either silence, and silence is not always approval. Silence sometimes means I really don't care. I just don't want to have anything to do with this. I don't like this. But what we have to do as senior leaders in our organizations is to invest more time in making sure everyone understands we've agreed. It may not be everything you want, but we've agreed. So when you walk out of this door, the last thing anyone needs to hear from anybody is, we did this decision, but I didn't really buy into it. Consensus means I can live with this and I can get behind it. I may not be fully happy. Who gets everything they want in life? But that's where we want to ideally end up as. So in agreement. Everybody's excited. Does everybody agree? Everybody jumped off rather. Oh, Nicole wants to argue some more. Go ahead, Nicole. You got something to say?
Well, it's not that I want to argue. It's just that I think it goes back to the original thing is, intention. Is it that we need everybody to be on board? Or is it that, it's a situation where majority rules, or, I'm giving you this to all go away and bring back to the next time with, and then we could go to even, Joe's point of problem solving kind of thing. So I think it's just, as long as you're clear that you might not be able to get to where you've moved everybody to 4, right? So I think it goes back, it speaks to your expectations, and it speaks to recognizing that some things can't be done in a 45 or a 1 hour kind of thing, right? So again, it's just about being clear as your meeting host, but also as your participant. Are you going to get there?
Yeah. Well, I agree, but I would also say that at the end of, so part of being part of a team is at some point you have to get with the program.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And if you can't do that, then it's time you may need to go try to be successful someplace else and have somewhere else. You need, okay, Diana, take care. I'll send you a note in a bit. So
We're
yeah,
a big fan of sending them off with love.
yeah,
That's how we
exactly.
send them off with love.
Yeah.
Not everything is everybody's cup of tea.
And I know that it's not always easy, or not, maybe it's hard to let people go, but especially at the management and the leadership team, everybody, what you need to do is create an environment where everyone has a chance to get it off their chest. Mm-hmm. And get that out there, and then a decision is made, and then everyone has to get behind the decision. And if you can't get behind the decision, then quite frankly, you need to think, I personally believe that person needs to get a grip on their life, but that may not always be possible, right? So,
right.
I just wanted to say, very, very helpful tip on that, making public the degree of which you support a decision. Not easy to get at that sincerity in the answer, but worth it, especially with Asians, for example. They don't like to come across as being in disagreement, but it's a very helpful message. And I take to your earlier point, I would still do it sort of one-on-one if they're uncomfortable, and go, and how much do you agree with this decision? How can I get you more comfortable? Loved it. I have to jump off, but I really want to say thank you very much again. Sorry.
Oh my gosh, where are you, Joe? I know you got to go, but whereabouts are you?
Miami.
Oh, nice. Oh, yeah, warm temperature guys joining the Well, it was great to see you, Joe. Hope you get to join us again. Wonderful.
Thank you very much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Okay, take care. And Nicole, it's just you and I again.
Yep.
Well, I'm just gonna wrap it up for the recording, and then we can maybe visit, because I do want to ask you a question. So
for sure.
Thanks very much, everybody, for the January -20°C version of the Better Leader Inner Circle. We had a great conversation. We had, I think, about 8 people live, I believe, or 7 or 8 people on here live, and great comments. And if you're listening to this on recording afterwards, I think you'll find some really great insights great ideas from all the participants. We're going to wrap this up today, and I wish everybody nothing but the best. And on a cold, miserable day like today, in Canada anyways, do me a favor and do not lick anything metal. Take care. Bye now.